Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story, we welcome back a favourite of the channel, Mr. JGrupe, JGrupe, from over on Reddit, No Sleep. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Prisoner of Lunamorte Manor. Let's get straight into that. As the ship disappeared into the distance, I looked out at the dark, white-capped sea and wondered again why I had neglected to get on board. It wasn't the first time I had chickened out at the last second. The growing waves and swirling black clouds above persuaded me to stay on dry land a week prior as well. And before arriving on Lunamorte Island, I had never been afraid of the ocean. But now that I was stuck there and surrounded by salt water, I was developing an unhealthy phobia of it. "Will you need a hand with your bags again?" A dry voice asked from behind me, causing me to jump. "Jeffrey, I told you not to do that." "Apologies, of course. Your bags?" I sighed resignedly and handed him two of the heavy bags, ultimately grateful for his help. He took them and turned around, trudging his way up the slippery, winding steps towards Lunamorte Manor. Thunder rumbled nearby and I quickly followed after him, the Gothic castle towering over us and casting us in its shadow as we walked. "Why can't I leave, Jeffrey?" He pretended not to hear me. I ran ahead of him and caught up, throwing my bags down and grabbing his prim-looking three-piece suit roughly by the lapels. His red-rimmed eyes looked stubbornly back at mine, not relenting, not giving an inch of ground. "Tell me, Jeffrey. Give me something. Anything." "I haven't the slightest idea what you mean, sir. Now, if you please, follow me. The Count will be expecting us." I let go of him instantly. The Count. Mustn't displease the Count. He would be the one to let me out of this place, I realized. I just had to reason with him. He hadn't wanted to hire me in the first place. Now I just had to convince him that his instincts were right all along. It wasn't the first time I had tried to get myself fired. I was pretty good at it, admittedly. The incident at the restaurant was particularly mortifying to think about, and made me cringe internally whenever I did. Fine. Let's go see him then. "I believe there is still the matter of the girl's lessons for today. If you are to stay, you must fulfill your duties here. The Count will insist on that, I can assure you." He began to walk again, not waiting for me to answer. The stone steps became increasingly narrow, steeper, and more treacherous as we got towards the top. There, the huge, wood-panelled doorway stood waiting. Gargoyle was guarding it and standing watch, looking down from above. Thunder boomed and lightning crashed as rain began to pour from the sky, falling torrentially, deafeningly. Jeffrey put his hand on the door to open it, and then stopped. He looked to be in deep thought for a moment. "You'll have to find a replacement. He'll keep you here just like he did to me, unless you find someone to take your place." His words were almost lost in a staccato beat of the rainfall, but I heard them just barely. With that, he opened the door and went inside, not waiting for my response. Finally, I had something to go on, a way out. I just had to find some other sucker to take my place. Why hadn't I thought of that? Florina and Alina came running down the steps to greet me at the door, their black hair streaming out behind them. Their shadows followed but were slightly delayed, and could be seen capering and dilly-dallying on the walls as if they had a mind of their own. "You're back," they shouted in unison, running up to me and hugging me. Their smiles were wide and long canines gleamed as they grinned. "We knew you couldn't go. You'd miss us too much." I felt bad but needed to be honest with them. They were tough and could take it. "I still have to go, girls. The weather was just really bad again. I'll have to leave the next supply ship, though. But I'll be here for another week at least, so we can finish reading Animal Farm together." Florina especially loved that book. She liked the pigs in it and was immediately enamored by the story. I'd read all the characters' parts in different voices, and she'd always giggle at the pigs' voices, especially. And the sheep were there. 4 legs good, and 2 legs bad. They hurried up to the library, where we had our classes together. I told them I'd be right up after I took my bags to my room. Jeffrey had left them at the door for me to handle the rest of the way, saying he needed to go to the kitchen and assist with preparations for dinner. Just then, I heard the all-too-familiar blood-curdling scream which came through the floor from deep below the castle. I would never get used to those. They always made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It made me wish I was anywhere else. At first, I had convinced myself it was merely the sea winds blowing through a tunnel in the rocks beneath the manor, but after a while, even I didn't believe it anymore. The sounds, well, they were too human. The howling screams were coming from the basement of the manor. I was fairly certain, and this was the one place where I was forbidden to go. I knew I needed to help whoever was down there. The Count and Geoffrey had told me exactly what I wanted to hear, and that it was indeed the wind blowing through the narrow tunnels beneath the old house. I had been happy to accept that for a while, but no longer. Part of the reason I wanted to flee the island was to get help for whoever was down there. A woman was being held prisoner by the Count. I just knew it. Part of me still wanted to try and sneak down there to confirm my suspicions, but it was nearly impossible, with Geoffrey sneaking around all the time. He seemed intent on keeping an eye on me, appearing out of nowhere whenever I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. There had to be secret tunnels all over the castle to accommodate such swift movement on his part. It seemed impossible otherwise. After hauling my bags back up to my room, I caught up with the twins and helped them with their studies for a few hours. They also had classes with their father, which were held in secret late into the night. Whenever I asked about what he was teaching them, to figure out if I could skip my weaker subjects, like math or whatever he was covering himself, the girls and the Count would refuse to enlighten me, only saying that it had to do with family history and things which go bump in a night, whatever that meant. And so I did my best with teaching them math, not my strongest subject, and English, which is my strongest subject, as well as art, science, music. I'm also tone deaf, and history, all using the dusty, out-of-date books from the castle library. The girls always exceeded my expectations, regardless of the field of study, and I found them to be quite intelligent and precocious. And despite their young age and their fondness for childish enjoyments like games and having a story read to them, they acted more like university students most of the time, especially during their studies. I couldn't believe how fast they picked up every aspect of what I taught and remembered it flawlessly. And soon they were embarrassing me with my lack of insight into tougher subjects like algebra and trigonometry. It made me realize that I had been on the island for far longer than I had thought. I had only wanted to stay for a few months, and already half a year had passed. I had long been putting off things I had been meaning to do, like reporting the screaming abductees in the basement, for instance. That was what prompted me to try and catch the next boat off the island. But alas, it was more difficult than I had foreseen. After my last lessons with the girls, we went downstairs to have dinner with the Count, and I planned to make my appeal to him afterwards, but not during dinner, or that would not go over well. I was sure of it. As I made my way downstairs towards the dining room, I passed a staircase which led to the basement. Geoffrey was busy in the kitchen, I remembered, and I wondered if this might be my chance. After sending the girls ahead, I looked over my shoulder to make sure nobody was watching, and then proceeded down the spiral staircase which led down to the cellar. The stone steps echoed loudly despite my efforts at stealth, and I braced myself for Geoffrey's sharp, commanding tone to scold me for my actions. But, for the first time, no one did. At the bottom of the staircase was a single door with a barred window at the top, strangely left ajar. I was surprised, since the butler was usually so fastidious. I thought of his red-rimmed eyes as they had looked at me outside, black bags beneath like loaded suitcases. The old man was tired. He had simply forgotten to lock up. I swung the door open slowly, listening to the loud creak it made and wincing at the noise, seeming to resonate echoing up the staircase and towards the top. Proceeding into the stone-walled room, my heartbeat began to hammer against my ribs. I tried to swallow, but my mouth and throat were so dry I couldn't even manage it. My anxiety began to build as I saw what had been kept hidden below. It was a dungeon. I continued in further and saw half a dozen cells with bars and sturdy locks, all hanging open except for one, the one at the end. Weeping could be heard coming from there, soft and suppressed, as if the woman making the sounds knew she was supposed to be quiet. When I got in front of the cell door, I saw her. She was a young woman with tangled chestnut brown hair, covered in dirt and grime. Her clothes were simple rags and my eyes filled with tears to see the conditions she was living in. A dog bowl had been put in one corner and there was a newspaper in the other corner for her to, well, you get the picture. It was a torturous scene and I immediately felt awful for her. That key was hanging up on a peg nearby and without thinking I went over to it and grabbed it, pulling it down from the hook. My hands were shaking as I bent down to the lock and fumbled, trying to insert it. "Wait," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's not a good idea. Who are you? Why is he doing this to you?" I asked, ignoring her. I got the key in the lock and turned it, opening the cell door. When it opened, she stood up, looking differently suddenly. I saw her eyes were odd. One was blue, the other green. "I told you
that wasn't a good idea,"
she said. Hair started growing from her paws and filling her face and arms with fur. She started growing taller, more muscular, and went down on all fours, beginning to growl. I backed away from the cell door, suddenly regretting going down there. What had I been thinking? A massive, growling wolf now stood before me, chestnut brown with tangled, matted fur. It appeared emaciated and lean, but moreover, hungry, famished, starving. It stalked out of its cage on all fours, its breath hot and humid on my face. Drool hung from its long, narrowing jaws as the beast continued to grow larger, taller, until it loomed over me, a low, rumbling growl coming steadily from within it. It lunged forward, its jaw snapping as it swiped to the air with its tremendous claws, missing me by mere inches as I ducked away. "Back, foul beast! Back in your cage!" Jeffrey was suddenly there beside me, brandishing a blazing torch and waving it wildly at the werewolf. He started thrusting a flame towards the giant creature like a sword, his eyes wide and full of terror. "Run! Get out of here!" He didn't need to ask me twice. I bolted out of the room and back to the base of the staircase. Jeffrey followed a few moments after, running quickly out of the dungeon room and slamming the door shut behind him, barring it and locking it as fast as he could. An instant later, snapping jaws were at the barred window, desperately trying to bite our heads off. Luckily, the door was strong, the locks even stronger. "I told you not to come down here," Jeffrey said, panting and out of breath, and still holding the door behind him with his body weight as it shook and heaved in the frame. A steady pounding noise, interspersed with the ragged scratching sound of claws scraping wood, came from the other side, but then, finally, ceased. Jeffrey backed away from the door and dusted off his hands, looking at me scornfully. "Now, if you will please follow me, dinner is served." And I felt as if I couldn't really argue with him. He had just saved my life, after all. We got to the dining room and found the long wooden table was already set. It was covered with a dark vermilion tablecloth, embroidered with the Count's family coat of arms. There were lit candelabras and centerpieces of dark purple and red flowers in brass and golden vases, which I had to look over the top of to see the Count. Dozens of different plates were arranged on the table. Meats and fish, roasted vegetables, potatoes and mushrooms, gravies and sauces of all sorts. A big, bloody roast was at the center of it all, to be carved by Jeffrey. Blood poured from it as he began cutting into the unidentifiable animal. My favorite two girls, and their splendid teacher. We had opted for this as my title since the Count told me he wanted to find a motherly figure to be the nanny for the girls. I got the feeling he was probably already recruiting someone for that position. It just wasn't easy to find someone willing to travel to this Gothic island castle surrounded by dark, treacherous ocean on all sides. I couldn't possibly imagine why. The four of us sat down and began to eat. As always, the food was delicious, seasoned and cooked to perfection. Did you have fun down in the dungeon with my other guest? I had to bite the zucchini in my mouth, which I nearly choked on as he said this. I managed to swallow it, probably into my lungs, and a coughing fit ensued. Barely able to contain my terror at what he might do, I tried to calm myself as fast as possible by taking a few sips of water. My eyes started to Geoffrey, but he had been with me the whole time. So how did the Count know we had been down there? I know all that happens within these walls and on this island. Nothing is kept secret from me here, he said, as if reading my panicked thoughts, or maybe he was, for all I knew. I finally managed to get over my coughing fit and stared at him uncertainly. The best thing to do, I decided, was to apologize. After all, it was the one place I hadn't been allowed to go, and in retrospect, for a good reason. They had actually been trying to protect me from the werewolf girl who they had imprisoned in the dungeon. And I had tried to save her, and she had tried to kill me. Which made me wonder if perhaps she was down there for a good reason, quite possibly of her own volition. I'm sorry. You told me not to go down there and I didn't listen. But I thought someone was in trouble. That you were keeping a woman prisoner down there. Which, I mean, you kind of are, but... I realized how that sounded and looked down at the table, feeling strangely ashamed of myself. Now the girls were looking at me with their jaws hanging down, not believing what was happening. You will leave with the next supply ship, 2 weeks from today. I will not have guests or employees who will not abide by the rules of my home. Your replacement will be on board that ship as well, so do not fret about the girls. I have been told she is very well qualified. But Dad! Florina and Alina called out in unison. No buts, and you will stop with your weather tampering and your phobia-inducing psychic spell casting as well. Young ladies, his time on this island is finished, and you will not interfere with his departure this time. Well, the 2 girls pouted and avoided eye contact with me. So it had been them the entire time. They had been messing with my mind using whatever dark magic their father had taught them, getting me panicked at the sight of the ocean and of the stormy weather, which they were also somehow manipulating. Oh, this family was a lot more interesting than I had thought. I was beginning to realize. At first I had thought that maybe they were vampires. Of course we're vampires, you idiot! Geoffrey rolled his eyes and kept cutting at the bloody roast. Hey, can I get a piece of that? I asked, holding out my plate. As rare as you can get it. You know this is a person, right? I set my plate back on the table and grabbed a piece of fish instead, and the 4 of them stared at me, waiting for my response. There wasn't much I could say, really. I'd just be happy to finally leave this place. I held up my goblet to make a toast. To the Count, I said, hoping to gain his forgiveness. 2 legs, good. 2 wings, better. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Absolutely awesome stuff from the incredible mind of JGrupe over on Reddit No Sleep. As I mentioned last week, Jordan has a brand new book out, available over on Amazon Bookstore. I'll leave the link to that in the description box below this video. Possibly one of the busiest writers over on Reddit and a good friend of the channel. Of course, as ever guys, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help both the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR. and DMT's Cryptid crew. Now, if you're an aspiring writer, want to get in touch with myself at the brand new contact email, which is, as on screen, contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's enjoying their summer, getting out and about in a good weather, and enjoying some good food and good company. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.